I'm quitting my job, you'll support us, said my sister. I said no and moved to another state. When my sister said those words, I froze. She stood in my kitchen, her arms crossed like a queen issuing orders, not a request. Her tone wasn't desperate, it was expectant, as if my paycheck had always belonged to her, and now she was just claiming what was already hers. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking. But she didn't, she meant it. And in that moment, I realized something that had been building for years. My sister wasn't asking for help. She was demanding ownership of my life. It wasn't sudden, not really. This was just the loudest echo of a pattern I had ignored for too long. The borrowed money that was never repaid. The temporary moves into my apartment that lasted months. The little digs about how I owed her because I was the responsible one. I had played along, telling myself it was family, telling myself I was being kind. But standing there, coffee cooling on the table between us, I felt something shift inside me. The air went heavy, my hands went still, and a calmness settled over me that I hadn't felt before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I knew that if I gave in now, I would never get my life back. And yet, what I didn't realize in that second, as I looked into my sister's smug expression, was that this was the beginning of the end. Within months, I would pack everything I owned, leave her behind, and move to another state without looking back. And that single choice would change everything. She didn't even blink when she said it, like she was reciting a fact carved into stone. I'm quitting my job, you'll support us. Just like that. Not could you help me? Not can we figure something out? No. It was a declaration, and in her eyes I saw the expectation that I would fold like I always had. My sister Danielle had made a career out of testing boundaries, and I had been her safety net since we were kids. I was the one who picked up the pieces when she wrecked her car, when she missed rent, when she stormed out of yet another job because management didn't appreciate her brilliance. And I had always stepped in, writing checks, giving her my couch, telling myself it was temporary, that family meant sacrifice. But this time it was different. This time, she wasn't asking me to bridge a gap. She was asking me to hand over my future, my salary, my stability, my peace of mind, all parceled up into a responsibility she felt entitled to. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth I'd been dodging. Danielle didn't see me as her sister anymore. She saw me as her plan B, maybe even her plan A. That realization burned deeper than anger. It was betrayal disguised as family. I tried to keep my voice steady. Danielle, I can't do that. She smirked, like she'd heard a child say they weren't going to eat their vegetables. Of course you can. You just don't want to. Don't be selfish. Family comes first. She leaned back in the chair. The same chair I had assembled when I first moved into this apartment. The same chair she had claimed as her own during one of her many stays. It hit me then. She had never contributed, not once. She had taken my time, my money, my patience, and now she wanted my life. And yet she looked so sure, so unshakable, as if she had already won. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The silence stretched between us until she broke it with a laugh, casual and cutting. You make enough. What's the big deal? It's not like you have kids. You don't even have a husband. You've got no one to take care of but me. Why are you making this so hard? Those words sliced deeper than she knew. I had always carried the quiet shame of not having the picture-perfect family, of focusing on my career while she played the role of reckless free spirit. And now she was weaponizing it, twisting my choices into obligations. For a second, I almost gave in. I almost let the guilt do its work the way it always had. But then something inside me hardened. A voice I had buried for years rose up. No, not this time. I stood, slow and deliberate, pushing my chair back with a scrape that made her flinch. Danielle, listen carefully. I will not support you, not financially, not emotionally, not anymore. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, like she couldn't compute what I had just said. You're kidding. I'm not. I walked to the sink, dumped the untouched coffee down the drain, and rinsed the cup as if I were erasing her hold on me. "You need to figure out your own life. I'm done being your crutch." She exploded then, her voice sharp and shrill, filling the apartment with every accusation she could muster. I was cold, heartless, ungrateful. I was abandoning her, betraying her. She threw every word like a stone, but they bounced off the armor I didn't even know I had been building. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just let her rage wash over me, knowing it was the sound of her realizing the game was finally over. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that my mind was already made up. I wasn't just refusing her demand. I was preparing my escape. Within weeks, I would transfer my job, pack my car, and cross state lines into a life that was mine alone. And when I closed that apartment door behind me for the last time, Danielle would still be shouting about family, about loyalty, about obligations I no longer carried. But her words wouldn't follow me. They would stay there, in that kitchen, with the sister who mistook my love for a lifetime supply of free passes. And I would be free for the first time in my life. Danielle didn't let it go. After that night, she made it her mission to break me down. She called every morning, sometimes before I even had coffee, repeating the same lines like a broken record. "You can't abandon me. You're all I have. You don't get to run away from family." Other times it was nastier. "You think you're better than me? You'll regret this. Don't forget who helped you when you were nobody." That part stung because it was a lie. She had never helped me. If anything, I had built my life despite her, not because of her. But guilt is a tricky thing, and she knew how to play it like a piano. The truth was, I had started planning quietly, without telling anyone. I researched job transfers, cost of living, new apartments. I opened a separate account, moved small amounts of money each week, and locked my credit reports. I knew Danielle. If she sensed what I was doing, she would try to sabotage it. She would accidentally rack up debt in my name or spin some sob story to my parents about how I was cruel and ungrateful. I had to be careful. I had to be silent. At work, I stayed late, telling my boss I was ready for more responsibility. When a position opened up in a different state, 3 hours away, I applied before I could second-guess myself. Within weeks, I had the offer in writing. A raise, a relocation bonus, a fresh start. That was when the fear hit me. Not fear of leaving, yes, but fear of telling Danielle. When I finally broke the news, her reaction was nuclear. "You're moving? Are you kidding me? You're just running away because you don't want to help me." What am I supposed to do? Her voice cracked on the last word, but there were no tears. Just fury. "Figure it out," I said quietly. "You're an adult. Start acting like one." That was the first time I had ever spoken to her like that, and I think it shocked her more than the move itself. She launched into a tirade, telling me I was selfish, that I'd end up alone, that no one would ever love me because I didn't know how to sacrifice. But I had already detached. Her words sounded distant, like a radio playing in another room. The night before my move, she showed up at my door with bags in her hands. "Fine," she said, her chin tilted in defiance. "If you're going, I'm coming too." I shook my head. "No, Danielle, you're not." She dropped the bags, her face twisted in disbelief. "You can't just leave me here." "You can't." I picked up the bags, placed them outside, and closed the door. She screamed, pounded, cursed, threatened. I sat on the floor on the other side, calm for the first time in years, and let her scream until her voice gave out. In the morning, I left. The drive to my new apartment felt surreal. Mile after mile, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. My phone buzzed nonstop. Angry texts, voicemails, even messages from extended family parroting her words. How could you abandon your sister like that? But with every mile, the noise grew fainter. By the time I crossed the state line, it was just me, the open road, and silence. That silence was freedom. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being her lifeline. From now on, I would live for me. Danielle didn't take my silence as an answer. She took it as a challenge. Within days of my move, she was blowing up our parents' phones, spinning the story to make me look like the villain. She abandoned me, she wailed. She doesn't care if I end up homeless. She only cares about herself. And of course, our parents, who had always treated me like the responsible one, called me with that familiar disappointment laced into their voices. She's your sister. You can't just turn your back on family. I almost laughed when my father said it, because wasn't that exactly what Danielle had been doing to me for years? But instead, I let the silence hang until he grew uncomfortable. Dad, I said finally, she is 31 years old. She's not a child. She's had 10 jobs in the past 5 years and quit all of them because she thought she was too good for them. I've given her money, a place to live, and more patience than she ever deserved. I'm done. My mother sighed on the other line, the same heavy sigh she had used my whole life whenever she didn't want conflict. But what if something happens to her? I felt my voice harden. Then she'll deal with it just like the rest of us do. I won't keep destroying myself to protect her from consequences she created. There was a pause, and for once, they had no response. Still, I knew they'd never see it my way, not completely. They had always enabled her, always excused her recklessness as just Danielle being Danielle. But I wasn't them. I didn't owe her my life. Danielle escalated from guilt to vengeance. She started posting about me on social media, vague, bitter messages about family who betray you and selfish sisters who think money matters more than love. Friends and relatives called me, some to check in, some to scold me. I ignored them all. I had nothing to defend. My truth was mine, and for the first time, I was learning to let other people's opinions roll off me. But then she went further. She showed up at my old apartment, pounding on the door, only to find it empty. She tracked down my new address through someone careless and drove 3 hours to my new city. I came home from work one evening to find her sitting on the steps outside my building, mascara streaked down her cheeks, a suitcase at her side. "You can't shut me out," she said hoarsely, her eyes wild. "I'm your sister. You're all I have." Something inside me broke then. Not for her, but for me. For the years I had wasted believing that sentiment. I crouched down, met her eyes, and said slowly, "You had me. Over and over again, and you used me until there was nothing left. But I'm not your safety net anymore." She stared at me, stunned, as if the words were in a language she couldn't understand. I stood up, walked past her, and unlocked my door. "You need to leave," I said without turning around. "Don't come back." I closed the door. Her pounding fists followed, her screams echoing in the hallway, neighbors peeking out with concern. I didn't open the door. I sat on my couch, staring at the blank TV screen, heart racing but unshaken. That night, I called building security and told them she wasn't welcome. The next morning, I informed the office that if she tried to contact me at work, she was to be escorted out. And when she left me 20 voicemails in one night, I blocked her number. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over her. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was only the beginning. Danielle's desperation only grew uglier once she realized I wasn't bluffing. When her calls and visits stopped getting through, she found new angles. I learned from a cousin that she had started borrowing money under the pretense that it was for both of us, telling people I had agreed to pay her back. One relative even called me directly, confused, asking when I planned to send the $800 I supposedly owed them. My jaw locked so hard I thought I might crack a tooth. She wasn't just manipulating me anymore. She was dragging my name through the mud to cover her own debts. I told them the truth, flat and cold. Don't lend Danielle another cent. And if you do, don't ever expect me to pay you back. It shocked them into silence. For once, the shame didn't belong to me, but Danielle didn't stop there. She started messaging my coworkers through social media, dropping hints that I was unstable and abandoned my family. One even showed me a message she sent. "She might seem nice at work, but you don't know who she really is." She left me to starve. I thought I would crumble under the humiliation, but instead, something inside me steeled. I forwarded the messages to HR, documented everything, and sat down with my manager. My voice didn't shake when I said, "My sister is harassing me. She's trying to sabotage my job, I need you to know this now, so there's no confusion. To my relief, my manager nodded, supportive. We've seen things like this before. Don't worry, we've got your back. That night, I sat in my new apartment, the city lights flickering outside, and realized something incredible. The walls Danielle used to bulldoze through weren't made of stone. They were made of me. My fear, my guilt, my silence, that was what had kept her in power. Now that I was building real walls, ones backed by documentation, boundaries, and allies, she had nothing left but noise. Still, the storm hadn't passed. A week later, I got a call from my bank about suspicious activity. Someone had tried to open a credit card in my name using my old address. My stomach turned, but I wasn't even surprised. I knew it was her. That night, I froze my credit completely, filed a report, and sent copies to my lawyer. Yes, my lawyer. Because by then I had stopped playing defense. I was preparing for war. Danielle had spent her whole life believing consequences didn't apply to her. But this time she was going to learn the hard way that I wasn't her personal insurance policy anymore. And when the fallout came, it wouldn't be my life collapsing. It would be hers. The unraveling came faster than even I expected. Danielle had always lived in chaos, but this time it wasn't just noise. It was collapse. The loan she had taken in my name didn't go through, but the ones she had signed for herself did, and the creditors started circling almost immediately. I didn't hear it from her, of course. I heard it from our parents, who called me one night in a panic, voices hushed as if whispering could soften the reality. Your sister is in trouble, my mother said. She has people calling the house, threatening legal action. Can't you just step in, just this once, to help her straighten it out? I closed my eyes, leaning against my window as the city below me moved on without care. No, I said, each letter sharp and final. This is what happens when you protect her from herself. Now she has to face it. My father grew angry then, his voice rising, accusing me of cruelty, of abandoning family values. But I didn't flinch. I had heard it all before. Family values aren't me funding her lies, I said flatly. Family values would have been teaching her to stand on her own years ago. You didn't, so now she's sinking, and I won't drown with her. I hung up before they could guilt me further, my hands steady even as my heart pounded. Danielle wasn't finished trying, though. She showed up again, this time outside my office building, screaming in the parking lot about how I had ruined her life, how I was heartless, how I had poisoned our parents against her. Security escorted her out before I even had to move. That night I filed for a restraining order. My lawyer told me it was the right step, not just for my safety, but to draw a legal line she couldn't cross. And when I sat in the courtroom weeks later, listening to her try to spin her sob story to the judge, I didn't cry. I didn't even look away. I told the truth calmly and clearly about the harassment, the fraud attempts, the stalking. Danielle sputtered, denying, twisting, but the paper trail spoke louder than she did. The restraining order was granted. Watching her face crumble as the judge read the ruling, I felt something I hadn't known in years. Peace. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. I was free in a way I had never been. She could still rage, still gossip, still play victim to anyone who would listen. But legally, physically, emotionally, she couldn't touch me anymore. That night in my quiet apartment, I realized I had crossed a threshold. Danielle's chaos was no longer mine to carry, and for the first time in my adult life, my future was mine alone. Danielle didn't vanish when the judge's gavel came down. If anything, she got louder, but from a distance now. Social media became her stage, every post a twisted half-truth about betrayal, about a sister who left her to rot. Old friends reached out, confused, some sympathetic, some suspicious, but I gave them all the same line. Believe what you want, but I'm not playing this game anymore. And I didn't. The difference now was that my words weren't empty. The restraining order gave me teeth, and she knew it. Every attempt to bait me became weaker, more frantic. Then the creditors closed in for real. I didn't see it firsthand. I heard it in fragments, whispered by relatives who had once defended her. She had maxed out 3 credit cards, taken payday loans with impossible interest rates, even tried pawning family jewelry she had no right to touch. When the calls started flooding my parents' house, they couldn't shield her anymore. For years, they had run interference, smoothing her messes with excuses. But this time, there was no smoothing left to do. They had to watch their golden child unravel in real time, and it broke them in ways I had predicted but never wanted to see. My father, who once scolded me for being ungrateful, called me late one night, his voice low and tired. "I think we made mistakes with her," he admitted. I sat in silence because what could I say? The admission came too late, and the wreckage was already there. My mother cried on the phone a week later, asking if there was any way I could talk sense into her. I told her gently but firmly, "No, that's not my job anymore." And I meant it. While Danielle spiraled, I was building something solid for the first time. My new job gave me stability. My new apartment gave me peace. And little by little, I found pieces of myself that had been buried under years of her chaos. I went to yoga classes, made friends who didn't know me as Danielle's sister, and spent evenings cooking in silence, no one draining me dry across the table. Every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I let it go. Every time a distant cousin tried to guilt me, I said nothing. My revenge wasn't loud or messy. It was absence. It was the life she no longer had access to, the door that would never open again. And slowly she learned it. The calls slowed. The posts grew less frequent. Eventually, even her tantrums burned out, leaving only the quiet wreckage of her own choices. By the time I drove back to my hometown, months later for a quick visit, it was clear to everyone Danielle was no longer the center of gravity. She was just another adult who had run out of people to blame. And me? I was free. I hadn't realized how much space Danielle had taken up in my mind until she was finally gone from it. At first, I expected the quiet to feel strange, like a missing limb. But instead, it felt like air filling my lungs for the first time in years. I'd wake up in my new apartment to the hum of the city instead of her voice demanding something from me. My mornings were mine. My paycheck was mine. My evenings weren't spent arguing over her latest crisis. They were spent in peace, cooking for one, watching movies, meeting new people who knew me simply as myself, and not the sister tied to Danielle's endless drama. Still, the fallout from her spiral kept trickling in. I learned she had taken a job at a diner but quit after a week, claiming the manager was abusive for asking her to mop floors. She tried selling handmade trinkets online, but her shop disappeared within a month after a flood of negative reviews from customers who never got their orders. Each failure seemed to push her deeper into bitterness, and she clung to the narrative that I had ruined her life. But here's the thing. Her story no longer touched me. Relatives who once guilted me stopped calling. Some even admitted privately that they saw now what I had been dealing with all along. "You were right to walk away," one aunt said quietly during a family gathering I almost skipped. "We just didn't want to believe it." That moment didn't bring me joy so much as relief. For once, I wasn't the villain in someone else's script. And the best revenge wasn't the restraining order, or even the distance. It was showing up to that gathering with calm eyes and steady shoulders while Danielle stayed home, isolated by her own actions. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The contrast spoke louder than any words could. One night, months later, I got an email from Danielle. It wasn't angry this time, it was pitiful. She wrote about how everyone had abandoned her, how she had no one left. For a brief moment, my old instincts kicked in. The urge to fix, to save, to cushion her fall. But then I remembered the pounding on my door, the credit card fraud, the years of manipulation. And I closed the email without replying. I knew now. Saving her had never been my job. Saving myself was. And that was exactly what I had done. By the time 6 months had passed, it was as if I had shed an entire skin. My old life with Danielle felt like a bad dream I had finally woken from. The constant phone calls, the manipulation, the way she sucked the air out of every room, gone. In its place was a rhythm that was entirely my own. I settled into my new job, earning respect not as the dependable sister, but as someone competent and independent. My boss trusted me with projects that stretched me in ways I hadn't experienced before, and for once the stress I carried was productive, not parasitic. Even my body felt different. I slept through the night without jolting awake at 2 a.m. from a text demanding money or a tearful voicemail about how Danielle's world was ending. I didn't grind my teeth anymore. I didn't feel the tight coil in my chest every time my phone buzzed. Freedom wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost quiet. It was peace. Meanwhile, word about Danielle filtered through in fragments. She had moved in with a friend but was asked to leave after only a month. She picked up another job, this time at a retail store, but walked out mid-shift when asked to cover for a sick coworker. She cycled through excuses. The world was against her. People were jealous. Managers were toxic. But no one bought it anymore. Even my parents had started to see. On a phone call with my mother, she admitted, "We can't keep bailing her out. It's destroying us." The weariness in her voice was a confirmation I had never expected to hear. My father, too, stopped trying to shame me into helping. They didn't apologize outright, but their silence spoke volumes. And Danielle? She went quieter. No more public tantrums, no more dramatic shows outside my apartment. Just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. My revenge had never been about punishing her. It was about refusing to play. Walking away was the loudest thing I could have done. The absence of my support forced her into the mirror she had always avoided. Whether she ever learned from it or not was no longer my concern. For the first time in my life, my future stretched out clean and unshackled. I was no longer Danielle's keeper. I was mine. The change in me became visible to everyone around me. At work, colleagues noticed I carried myself differently, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, voice firmer. I wasn't the woman constantly checking her phone, worrying what disaster was waiting at home. I was present. I was focused. And outside of work, I finally had room for joy. I joined a local hiking group, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the bandwidth for when Danielle's chaos ran my life. Weekends that once disappeared into cleaning up her messes were now spent on trails, breathing mountain air, meeting people who had no idea of the weight I used to carry. I made real friends, ones who gave as much as they took. One of them, a woman named Claire, said something that stuck with me. "You have the calm energy of someone who's been through fire and chose not to burn." She was right. I had been through fire, but I had walked out. Danielle's name still floated around family gatherings, though less frequently now. The updates were never good. She was couch hopping, falling behind on rent, picking fights with anyone who tried to help. Each story used to crush me, but now it only confirmed what I already knew. My choice had saved me. And strangely, it had started to save others too. Relatives who once funneled her money quietly stopped. Friends she used to manipulate began saying no. Without me shielding her, the pattern was impossible to ignore. My parents, once her greatest defenders, had grown weary. When I visited for the holidays, my mother pulled me aside, her voice trembling. "I used to think you were cruel for walking away. Now I see you were strong." Tears filled her eyes, but mine stayed dry. I had cried enough for all of us over the years. Instead, I just nodded. I didn't need their apology anymore. I had already given myself the closure. Back in my own apartment, stringing lights around my tiny balcony, I thought about Danielle less and less. She was fading into the background of my story, no longer the villain at the center but a shadow from a past I had outgrown. The real story was mine now, my freedom, my peace, my quiet revenge that needed no spectacle. And deep down, I knew this. The best decision I had ever made wasn't moving to another state. It was saying no and meaning it. By the time a full year passed, I barely recognized the woman I had been when Danielle tried to chain her future to mine. My days were filled with work I actually enjoyed, dinners with friends who lifted me up instead of draining me, and a new kind of confidence that came from knowing I could survive choosing myself. I even started dating again, something I hadn't dared to try while Danielle was in the picture, because any spark of joy I found, she smothered with drama. The man I met, Alex, wasn't flashy or overwhelming. He was steady, kind, and he listened when I spoke. On our third date, sitting across from him at a small Italian restaurant, I laughed, a real unguarded laugh, and realized I couldn't remember the last time I had done that without fear of my phone buzzing with a crisis. It felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. Danielle's presence hadn't vanished completely, though. Every so often, I'd hear whispers through family. Another eviction, another job abandoned, another meltdown that left bridges burned. The stories no longer filled me with dread or guilt. They only confirmed the truth I had learned. No amount of sacrifice on my part would ever have saved her. Only she could do that, and she still hadn't chosen to. My parents, once so quick to scold me, had softened. They spoke less about what I owed Danielle, and more about how proud they were that I was building a life of my own. I didn't gloat, but I could see the shift in their eyes when they compared the daughter who stood on her own 2 feet with the one who still expected the world to bend to her. Quietly, the balance had tipped. The family narrative had changed, and I no longer carried the weight of trying to prove myself. One night, sitting on my balcony with Alex, city lights twinkling in the distance, I told him the whole story. The manipulation, the restraining order, the move. He listened without judgment, then took my hand and said, "You saved yourself. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." And in that moment, I believed it. For so long, I had thought of myself as weak for taking so long to say no. But now I understood. Strength isn't never bending. It's knowing when to stop breaking. My life was no longer defined by Danielle's chaos. It was defined by my choice to step away, and as I leaned into Alex's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of a life I had built for myself, I knew that was the truest revenge of all. It was around the 18-month mark when the final pieces of clarity settled into place. By then, my new life felt steady, rooted, not a fragile escape, but a foundation I had built brick by brick. I had friends I trusted, routines that nourished me, a man beside me who saw me as whole, not as someone to be used. My world was full of laughter, dinners that stretched late into the night, hikes that left my legs aching in the best way, mornings where I woke without dread. And yet Danielle's shadow still flickered in the background, though fainter now. Word reached me through family that she had burned nearly every bridge left. Old friends stopped answering her calls, landlords refused to renew leases, even my parents, her fiercest protectors, had finally drawn their own line. My father told me bluntly one afternoon. She begged us to cover another loan. We said no. The shock in his voice was almost comical, as if he had just discovered the word himself. But more than shock, there was resignation. They had finally accepted what I had known all along. Enabling her was the same as destroying her. Danielle, of course, spun her own version of the story. She painted herself as the abandoned victim, cursed with a cold family and a cruel sister. For a long time, I worried those stories would define me, that people would believe her. But as months passed, I realized no one cared to keep listening. People move on. Drama loses its shine. And while she clung to her narrative of betrayal, I was writing a very different one. The sweetest part of it all was how little revenge required of me. I didn't need to humiliate her publicly, didn't need to shout my truth louder than her lies. I simply lived well, and the contrast was unmissable. At a family gathering, I walked in with Alex, confident and calm, while Danielle was conspicuously absent, her excuses muttered through secondhand messages. My mother hugged me tighter than she ever had before, whispering, "You look so happy." She didn't say it, but I could hear the unspoken words, happier without her. And she was right. That was my quiet victory. I hadn't just escaped Danielle. I had escaped the version of myself that thought love meant carrying someone until my own knees broke. My revenge was not in watching her fall. It was in standing tall, finally, on my own. And every time I breathed in the calm of my apartment, or laughed freely with new friends, or felt Alex's steady hand in mine, I knew I had won in the only way that mattered. 2 years after the day she stood in my kitchen and announced I would be her lifeline, I drove past my old neighborhood on a trip back home. The streets were the same, but I wasn't. I parked for a moment outside that apartment. The one where I had poured countless hours and dollars into keeping Danielle afloat, and I let the memory wash over me. The pounding on the door, the screaming voicemails, the way I used to shrink myself to make space for her endless demands, that ghost of me was gone. Later that night, over dinner with my parents, I heard the latest. Danielle was living in a rundown rental with strangers, working odd jobs she never kept longer than a month. The bills were piling up, and her name was whispered in town like a cautionary tale. For once, my parents didn't ask me to step in. They didn't plead for me to soften. My father just shook his head and muttered, "She did this to herself." My mother looked at me across the table and gave a small, sad smile, as if to say she finally understood. And in that silence, I felt something close. Not the bond with Danielle, but the wound she had left in me. For years, I had believed I was cruel for wanting to walk away, that I was betraying family by drawing boundaries. But here I was, 2 years later, thriving, whole, loved. And Danielle was still chasing the same chaos she had built for herself. My revenge had never been fire and fury. It was this: sitting across from my parents with calm in my chest, a life I had built without her weight, and a future she could never touch. Driving back to my new state the next morning, the sun rising over the highway, I realized I no longer carried even anger toward her. Just distance, just freedom. And maybe that was the sharpest revenge of all. Not proving her wrong, not making her pay, but living so fully without her that her absence became irrelevant. I had said no, and I had meant it. And because of that, I was free. The years that followed turned into the clearest proof that my decision had been the right one. Danielle's life unraveled like a thread pulled loose from a sweater, little by little at first, then all at once. She bounced from job to job, state to state, never staying long enough to plant roots, always blaming someone else for why things never worked out. I stopped keeping track of the details. They reached me through whispers from relatives, through clipped comments in group chats I barely responded to. At first, I'd tense every time her name came up, bracing myself for another guilt trip or a demand that somehow made its way back to me. But over time, the tension softened into indifference. Her choices were her own, and I had finally learned to let them stay that way. What surprised me most wasn't her downfall, it was my rise. My life, once consumed by her chaos, became a space where possibility bloomed. I traveled for the first time in years, standing barefoot on beaches I'd only ever seen in pictures, feeling the sun without the weight of 1,000 unreturned favors pressing into my back. I advanced in my career, my boss calling me a rock during meetings, trusting me with projects that shaped the company's future. I built friendships where laughter came easy, not because we ignored crises, but because there were none to manage. And then there was Alex, patient, steady Alex, who never once made me feel like I was too much or not enough. With him, I learned what partnership meant, not one person draining the other dry, but two people carrying life side by side. One night, sitting together on the balcony of our new home, I told him everything I'd once been afraid to say out loud. How small I had felt under Danielle's shadow. How deeply she had convinced me my worth was tied to how much I could carry for her. He took my hand, pressed it to his chest, and said, "You don't have to carry anything alone anymore." And in that moment, I knew the circle was complete. Danielle had once stood in my kitchen and demanded I give her my future. Instead, I gave it to myself. That was the quietest, strongest revenge I could have ever taken. Not shouting, not fighting, but living. Living fully, deeply, joyfully, in a way that she could never steal from me again. I no longer needed her apology, her approval, or even her acknowledgement. I had carved a life that stood on its own, proof that saying no had been an act of survival, not cruelty. And as I looked at the skyline stretching beyond that balcony, I realized I hadn't just moved to another state. I had moved into another life, one where Danielle's voice was nothing but a faint echo, too far away to touch me anymore. In the end, Danielle became a cautionary tale I no longer carried. People still asked sometimes, old acquaintances, distant relatives, "Do you talk to your sister?" And my answer was simple: no. No excuses, no guilt, no explanations, just no. Because I had learned that family is not a free pass to destroy each other. Blood might tie you together, but respect is what keeps you there. And once respect is gone, obligation is nothing but chains. I look back at that moment in my kitchen when she crossed her arms and told me I'd support her, as if my life belonged to her. And I realize that was the day I was given a choice: surrender or freedom. I chose freedom, and that choice shaped everything that followed: the career I built, the peace I found, the love I welcomed. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was quiet, steady, undeniable. It was in every sunrise I watched without a crisis hanging over me, in every paycheck I spent on building my future instead of patching her chaos, in every night I slept without fear of my phone lighting up with another demand. She wanted my life to belong to her. Instead, it belongs to me, and I will never give it away again. So tell me, was I heartless for walking away? Or was saying no the only way to finally save myself?